Well, we will have a pair of presentations, first from Dr. Justin Young, and then from Dr. Sean McDonough. They will present in that order. I'm going to introduce them both now, and then they'll come up one after the other, and then we'll wrap up our time with as much Q&A as we're able to fit in the time. Okay? So Dr. Justin Young, I think, is well familiar to many of you from the Hebrew and Old Testament track. He has been at our Jacksonville campus for many years, actually quite a few years if you go back to his student days, and then as an adjunct faculty, and then really a core member of the team of the Jacksonville campus. He's a very big part of what has made that campus such a magnet for theological education across North Florida, Jacksonville, Gainesville, Tallahassee. He's been a key to a lot of events that we do with alumni, with local churches, and in the role that I play. Oh, and I'm Jerry Wheaton, by the way. I should have introduced myself. I serve as academic dean at Gordon-Conwell, and so in that capacity, I've gotten to interact with Dr. Young quite a bit through the years, formally and informally as well. Dr. Young's main area of research is in Pentateuchal studies, with a particular view toward the covenant at Mount Sinai and the construction of the tabernacle in Exodus 19 to 40. Some of his other research interests include the theology and exegesis of the Psalms, biblical theology, and cultic rituals in the ancient Near East. After graduating from Gordon-Conwell in 2014, he and his wife Gina moved to Belfast, Northern Ireland, where he completed his PhD from the Queen's University of Belfast in 2018. His dissertation is entitled Sinai and the Sanctuary, Reassessing the Source-Critical Distinction Between Priestly and Non-Priestly Material in Exodus 19 to 40. Dr. Young is currently co-authoring a commentary on the book of Exodus with his former supervisor, PhD supervisor, T. Desmond Alexander, for the new series entitled The Bible in God's World, which is published by Cascade. Dr. Young and his wife Gina have a daughter named Maggie, 5 years old, who is becoming a terror on the softball field, I understand. So it's a real delight to have Dr. Young with us today. Thank you for making the trip all the way up from Florida. And then Dr. Sean McDonough is no stranger to any of you. I'm sure if you've made your way through the exegesis track in New Testament, you've probably had him for one or another exegesis course, or the use of the Old Testament in the New Testament, various cultural backgrounds to the New Testament, and of course, maybe best known, his exegesis of Revelation course, which I'm constantly pushing students to take. That has been his specialty for 25 years and more. Dr. McDonough came to Gordon-Conwell in the year 2000 from Pacific Theological College in Suva, Fiji, where he had served as the chair of Biblical Studies Department and as lecturer in New Testament. Dr. McDonough remains active in ministry. He is a Sunday school teacher and occasional preacher at First Congregational Church in Hamilton. He's also a speaker for MedAir, a Christian relief organization based in Switzerland. His research interests include creation and cosmology in the Bible and the ancient Near East, Hellenistic Judaism, Greek philosophy, and religion, and the book of Revelation. His most recent publication is Truth's Consuming Ecstasy, Literary and Philosophical Investigations of the Apocalypse of John, and that's published by Baylor. Dr. McDonough and his wife Ariana have 4 now adult children, so empty nest season. And I can say my own scholarly journey was really formed importantly by his mentorship when I was a student here 25 years ago, and then also when I was doing my studies at St. Andrews. Dr. McDonough had a sabbatical during one of the years that I was there, and we were able to reconnect, and he's just been a great encouragement to me all through my career. So it's a delight to have you again, Dr. McDonough, chatting with us today. So as I said, what I'm going to do is invite first Dr. Young and then Dr. McDonough to come up and share some reflections on the biblical theology of Exodus, and then we'll have time for Q&A after.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Let me just start by giving my thanks to Dr. Wheaton and Dr. McDonough for the invitation to speak at this Dean's Forum today. And although he's not here, I would also like to just publicly give my thanks to T. Desmond Alexander, who in so many ways has formed my thinking on the book of Exodus. And to be working on this commentary with him has just been a great joy and a gift to me. The book of Exodus recounts the paramount salvation event in the Old Testament. When the psalmist in Psalm 77 describes his distress in the first half of the psalm, he is comforted by calling to mind the years of the right hand of the Most High and his wonders of old. The psalmist's appeal to Yahweh's journey through the sea and the leading of Yahweh's people by the hand of Moses and Aaron make clear that the Exodus is in view. The psalmist is comforted by recalling that although Yahweh yet led the people of Israel through the waters of the Exodus, his footprints were unseen. Although these events are events of the past, they are the psalmist's present hope and comfort. Yahweh's delivering of the Israelites from slavery is regarded by Christopher J.H. Wright as the primary model of redemption in the Old Testament. Similarly, Brian Estelle regards the Exodus as the foundational salvific event of the Old Testament. Daniel Hayes refers to the Exodus event as the central paradigmatic picture of deliverance of the Old Testament. And still one more, Mark Scarlatta says the Exodus contains the story of salvation par excellence. It is important to recognize that the Exodus event does not come to us as a standalone event, severed from its literary context. Rather, the Exodus event is part of a broader narrative found in the book of Exodus. Go figure. While this isn't a basic fact, observing this deters us from describing the Exodus as merely being about a story of the emancipation of slaves from Egypt. To do so recalls only the first half of the book, or at least the first 15 chapters. The book of Exodus recounts not only the Israelites' deliverance from subjugation, but also the Israelites' willful entrance into a covenant relationship with Yahweh in the book's second half. In so doing, the book of Exodus traces the Israelites' journey from slavery under Pharaoh to their new status as Yahweh's treasured possession, as they come under his kingship. To use the language of Colossians 1:13, they are transferred from a kingdom of darkness to a kingdom of light. In addition, the book of Exodus itself is part of a larger narrative that presupposes the events recorded in the book of Genesis, ranging from the prerequisite knowledge of certain characters like Abraham or Israel, to the reason the Israelites are in Egypt at the beginning of the book, to the covenant with Abraham, which is the impetus for the Israelites' deliverance in the first place. In addition, the book of Exodus calls our attention back to the very beginning when describing the growth of the Israelites in Exodus 1:7 in a manner that is reminiscent of Genesis 1:8. The numerical growth of the Israelites fulfills the divine command of Genesis 1:28, which is renewed with Noah after the flood. The observation in verse 7 that the land, Eretz, was filled with them recalls the filling of the earth, Eretz, in Genesis 1:28. As Terence Fretheim notes, the wording of verse 7 suggests that the Israelites are carrying out God's creation directive. When viewed against its larger narrative backdrop, the book of Exodus recounts a partial restoration of the divine-human relationship broken by Adam and Eve's defiance of Yahweh in the Garden of Eden. While the book of Exodus forms a positive step forward in Yahweh's redemption plan in its own right, later biblical authors speak of the Exodus with the expectation of a greater exodus to come. After describing the righteous reign of the coming stump of Jesse in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 through 10, in verse 11, he says, "In that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea." He goes on to say in verses 15 and 16, he goes on to describe in verses 15 and 16 the future deliverance of God's people by depicting a second exodus through the waters. He says this, "And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with his scorching breath, and strike it into 7 channels, and will lead people across in sandals. There will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, and there was for Israel, as there was for Israel when they came out from the land of Egypt." Revelation 15 makes clear that the second Exodus is accomplished through the work of Christ. In verses 2 through 4 describe those who conquered the beast and its image as, quote, "standing beside the sea of glass with harps of God in their hands." This image unmistakably recalls the Israelites on the banks of the Yam Suf, who sang a song commemorating Yahweh's great victory over Pharaoh and his army. Richard Bauckham describes the sea of glass as the, quote, "heavenly Red Sea through which they have passed." The title of the song that they sing is familiar, but it is lengthened to account for the second Exodus. The song has now become, quote, "the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb." By associating the future righteous reign of the coming Davidic king with the Exodus of old, the Old Testament prophets present a paradigm of salvation. Nicholas Piotrowski succinctly captures this by saying, "The Exodus is Yahweh's quintessential act of an international self-revelation and redemption that brings Israel through the wilderness to his sacred presence and forms them into a covenantal, worshiping people through the blood of the Passover lamb, all in measured fulfillment of his purposes in creation and in eschatological expectation of a new world." As the book of Hebrews makes clear, the events of the book of Exodus are a shadow pointing forward to a greater deliverance from a greater foe, from greater bondage, by a greater Moses, by a better sacrifice, presented by a greater high priest in the ultimate temple. In this way, it might be said that the book of Exodus is not just a story of the Bible. It is the story of the Bible, and it reverberates all throughout the scriptures. To focus on Exodus from a biblical theological perspective at Gordon-Conwell is fitting. Gordon-Conwell has been and continues to be a bastion of biblical theology. Biblical theology is a certain kind of analysis of Scripture that seeks to trace the development of God's revelation throughout the canon. The book of Exodus in particular has rightly been given a significant focus at Gordon-Conwell. And just to name a few published works, which is quite dangerous because I'm sure I will leave some out, I think of Walter Kaiser's Exodus commentary in the Expositor's Bible Commentary series, or Doug Stewart's Exodus commentary in the Knack series. Also Jeff Niehaus, God at Sinai, or Meredith Kline, The Structure of Biblical Authority. And even now, Dr. Petter, Donna Petter, is currently working on a work in biblical theology associated with Exodus 34. There are many others I could mention here. Meredith Kline's work is of note given the impact it has had on the field of biblical theology and biblical studies in general. As Ralph Hawkins remarks, Meredith Kline charted the direction for a radical shift when he proposed that the origins of the gospel genre could be found in the Old Testament, specifically in the book of Exodus. It is impossible to capture every facet of this immense topic in a 30-minute presentation. Virtually every corpus of the Bible taps into the Exodus motif. For example, we could spend the entirety of our time discussing the influence of the Exodus on any one of the four Gospels. The book of John, in particular, can be organized according to the so-called book of signs in chapters 1 through 12, which recount the signs of the Exodus, recall the signs of the Exodus, and the book of the Passion, 13 to 20, which focuses on Jesus as the suffering Lamb of God. Similarly, an entire course could be devoted to various points of connection between the book of Revelation and the book of Exodus. Rather than seeking to be comprehensive, my goal is to focus on three key aspects related to the Exodus paradigm from a biblical theological perspective. Since Exodus derives its name from the Greek word associated with going out, I felt it appropriate to organize my talk according to the aim or telos of the Exodus. What do the Israelites go out toward? The Israelites are brought out from Egypt toward at least three things. They are brought out to covenant, they are brought out toward holiness, and they are brought out toward the mountain of God. By pulling on these three threads, my hope is to provide a mere starting point or a springboard for further study on the topic. Exodus toward covenant. The Israelites are brought out of Egypt in order to enter into a covenant with Yahweh. Exodus 19 marks a significant new phase in the story of the Pentateuch. The Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai in chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, and they stay there until Numbers 10. Exodus 19 to 24 details the covenant Yahweh makes with the Israelites at Mount Sinai. Unlike their previous status as slaves in Egypt, the Israelites now have the opportunity to become Yahweh's treasured possession. The aim of the Sinai covenant is made clear in Yahweh's statement in 19:4 through 6, in which the Israelites are promised that if they keep the covenant, they will become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It is essential to recognize that this offer is extended to the Israelites only after Yahweh had graciously delivered them from their bondage in Egypt. Importantly, this offer is conditioned on the Israelites' obedience to the covenant terms. If the Israelites commit to being Yahweh's special possession by giving him their exclusive obedience, they will become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. This terminology appears only here in the Old Testament. While there is a genitive relationship between kingdom and priests, i.e., kingdom of priests, scholars disagree on the nature of this relationship. While numerous interpretive possibilities exist, a major division can be drawn between two overarching approaches. The first contends that the phrase kingdom of priests indicates that a priestly elite class will rule the Israelites. And the second argues that all Israelites will, in some sense, be priests. Philip Peter Jensen rightly objects to the former view by stating, quote, "Despite its recent popularity, a kingdom ruled by priests appears to be an unlikely interpretation of kingdom of priests. While grammatically attractive, the immediate context strongly suggests that the three key terms, treasured possession, kingdom of priests, and holy nation, all refer to the whole people. Once the first view is jettisoned, three main possibilities remain: a kingdom made up of priests but ruled by God, a kingdom characterized by a priestly function, or thirdly, a nation composed of priestly royals, i.e., all Israelites are both priests and kings. While grammar and syntax do not by themselves lead to definitive conclusions, there is reason to favor the third option. The phrase probably indicates that the Israelites are called to be a kingdom over which they rule as priestly royals. This presents a striking contrast to their previous status as slaves under Pharaoh. The concept of the Israelites as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation is reflected in the ritual associated with the ratification of the covenant, in which all Israelites are required to consecrate themselves in preparation for the covenant ceremony. This status offered to the Israelites is reflective of Adam and Eve's status in the Garden of Eden, who enjoyed fellowship with Yahweh as priest-like vice-regents and were tasked with extending Yahweh's reign over the earth. Although the Israelites fail to keep the terms of the covenant, forfeiting the prospect of becoming a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, this promise is fully realized among the new people of God. Peter addresses Christian believers by saying, quote, "But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who brought you out of darkness into his wonderful light." This promise of the covenant is applied to the church because of what Christ has accomplished on their behalf. John's description in Revelation 5, verses 9 and 10, in it, he depicts Christ as the slain lamb standing before God's throne and 4 living creatures. He recounts how Christ's finished work enables believers to be a kingdom of priests. It says this, "And they sang a new song, saying, 'You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth.'" According to John, because Christ has purchased believers from every tribe, language, people, and nation, this now enables them to serve God as a kingdom of priests. Notably, this renewed status also entails that his people will, quote, "reign on the earth." What was once forfeited, resulting from Adam and Eve's betrayal of God, has now been regained in Christ in the new Exodus. While Christ serves before the Father as our great high priest within the heavenly sanctuary, God's covenant people are also to live their lives in priestly service to God, lives that are oriented toward Yahweh's holy sanctuary. As such, believers are called to live lives in such a way live their lives in such a way that reflect the holiness of God, whose Spirit now dwells among them. Exodus toward holiness. And I have no idea how I'm doing on time, so just someone wave your hands, and then I'll start wrapping it up. Yeah. The Exodus narrative is not merely a story of the deliverance of Israelite slaves from bondage. It is, at its core, a story of a people who were once alienated from God being made holy in order that Yahweh may dwell in their midst. To that end, the book of Exodus describes 3 different consecration rituals. Firstly, in saving the Israelite firstborn males from death, the Passover ritual sanctifies them, making them belong to God. Although scholars commonly contend that the Passover is related to an ancient shepherding practice associated with warding off evil spirits, i.e., not a consecration ritual, this approach is open to challenge. In addition to noting the use of hyssop in the Passover ritual, which is later used for consecration in Leviticus, T. Desmond Alexander observes that the procedures for the Passover ritual closely parallel the elements involved in the other 2 consecration rituals in Exodus, the sealing of the covenant in Exodus 24 and the consecration for the priesthood in Exodus 29. He remarks that, quote, "Although there are differences of detail, Similar elements underlie the Passover, suggesting that it too functions as a consecration ritual. The sacrifice of the animal atones for the sin of the firstborn males. The blood smeared on the doorpost purifies those within the house, and the eating of the sacrificial meat and unleavened bread sanctifies those who consume it. By participating in the Passover ritual, the firstborn of Israelite males are endowed with a holy status. They belong to Yahweh, 13:2. Later, in Numbers 3 and Numbers 8, God substitutes the Levites for the firstborn males, granting them the privilege of camping closer to the tabernacle than the other Israelite tribes. The second consecration ritual comes in association with the sealing of the covenant at Mount Sinai in 24:3-11. In verses 9 through 11 record the experience of the chief men who ascended the lower slope of Mount Sinai. Remarkably, little is said of the chief men's experience while on the mountain. In addition to commenting on the pavement under Yahweh's feet, the text indicates that the chief men were able to feast on the mountain and that Yahweh did not send out his hand against them. The chief men were able to partake of the covenant meal on the mountain without being harmed by Yahweh. How could this be, especially in light of Yahweh's previous instructions to erect barriers around the mountain in chapter 19? The events described in verses 3-8 provide the answer to this question. The chief men are able to ascend the mountain and approach Yahweh at a distance because of the blood applied to them, which consecrated them at the base of the mountain, enabling them to ascend in closer proximity to Yahweh. The third consecration ritual comes in Exodus 29, which prescribes the procedures for consecrating the Israelite priesthood. Although the consecration ritual for Aaron and his sons is more elaborate due to the higher degree of holiness associated with priestly service, it follows a similar pattern to the events described in Exodus 24. After sacrificing offerings, some of the blood is applied to the priests. The priests then partake in a meal, which they then eat at the threshold of the tent of meeting. These three consecration rituals in Exodus reflect that the Israelite journey out of Egypt is a journey toward holiness, a journey that will ultimately come to fruition under the new covenant. The New Testament authors use these consecration rituals as the backdrop for describing Jesus' atonement. Some of these are more obvious than others. All three of the Synoptic Gospels make reference to Jesus' inauguration of the new covenant at the Last Supper in association with the Passover. After identifying Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world in John's Gospel, he later indicates that Jesus' death resembles the Passover lamb in that his bones were left unbroken. Just as the Israelites' firstborn were ransomed by the blood of the Passover lamb, new covenant believers are ransomed from death by the blood of Christ. Just as the Israelites partook of the Passover lamb, so too the new covenant people of God partake spiritually of the body and blood of Christ. The scene of the Israelites' chief men feasting on the mountain of God images the ultimate hope of God's people, namely that they will one day be planted on Yahweh's holy mountain forever. In light of this hope, it's not surprising that Isaiah envisions a day in which Yahweh will prepare a great banquet on his mountain, in which every tear will be wiped away, in which he will wipe away every tear, in which every tear will be wiped away and death will be swallowed up forever, Isaiah 25. This hope will be fully realized in the New Jerusalem, the marriage supper of the Lamb, Revelation 19. 5 more minutes, yeah. The sealing of the covenant at Mount Sinai is of paramount importance in the book of Exodus. The enduring sacrifices of these, significance of these events can be observed, for example, in key New Testament references to Exodus 24. When Paul contends that the Old Testament scriptures were, quote, were written, quote, for our instruction, he does so through possible allusion to Exodus 24:12. Perhaps most notably, when inaugurating the new covenant at the Last Supper, Jesus likely alludes to Moses' words in 24:8 when saying, quote, this is the blood of my covenant. If this is the case, this confirms that the gospel writers observed a kind of continuity between the blood of the Passover and the blood used for the sealing of the covenant at Mount Sinai. These allusions reflect the idea that the events of Exodus 24 were regarded as much more than mere history for the New Testament authors. Rather, they are instructive for life under the new covenant. In addition to the Israelites' journey toward holiness through Exodus, the concept of holiness is vital for understanding the events that take place at Mount Sinai, the first location in all the scriptures to be described as, quote, holy. And of course, we've now come to the final category, and I've left myself about 3 minutes to do that. So I'm actually going to just briefly talk through this last one, Exodus toward the mountain of God. The Israelites journey to the mountain of God, and they come there in Exodus 19. The mountain of God is in the Pentateuch. Well, the way I describe this is that I often describe it as placing a bowling ball in the middle of a mattress. And if you put marbles on the mattress, they all kind of go toward the bowling ball. This is foreshadowed in Exodus 3 when Moses encounters the burning bush. And God actually tells Moses that this will be a sign to you that you will worship me on this mountain. And so this is all foreshadowed in Exodus 3. In Exodus 19, God's presence descends on the mountain of God, making this kind of the mountain this sort of prototypical sanctuary in which the Israelites, it makes the mountain into this kind of prototypical sanctuary. Moses actually goes up the mountain, and it's there that he actually receives the plans for the sanctuary. When Moses is on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, he is to come down, of course, when he comes down the mountain, there to make a copy of the sanctuary, the heavenly throne room. The sanctuary was always intended to be a copy of the heavenly throne room. This is not something the book of Hebrews just sort of adds to the text. It's embedded right there in the book of Exodus. Exodus 25:9 makes clear that Moses is to build the tabernacle according to what he sees on the mountain. Also, when you look at the way that the presence of God is described on the mountain, of him dwelling on the mountain in Exodus 24, and compare that to the language of him entering into the sanctuary, those two descriptions mirror each other, making clear that the tabernacle is intended to be a kind of replica or portable Mount Sinai. This idea of the tabernacle being a portable Mount Sinai is picked up by a whole host of scholars. I could start naming a bunch of them, but I'm going to stop short. That observation actually goes back to a rabbinic idea that has been picked up in a number of ways in scholarship. In my own study of the book of Exodus, one of the things that I've come to realize is that that is a very generative idea in our biblical theological understanding of the Bible, because it provides a kind of continuity to the Sinai tradition and the Zion tradition. Biblical studies has this tendency to try to separate those two things out and treat them as though they have nothing to do with each other. And yet the book of Exodus would have us kind of hold those two things together. That what you get at Mount Zion is really this kind of 2.0 version of the things that we're introduced to in the book of Exodus. And so it's not surprising then that when the prophets speak of this hope of Zion, this renewed vision of Zion, like in Isaiah chapter 2, it does so in ways that actually recall the Exodus. So in Exodus 2, you get the mountain of the house of the Lord being raised above all the other mountains, and the Torah, the instruction of God going forth from the mountain. And as a result of that picture that you get in Isaiah 2, universal peace ensues as a result of all of this. And so, yes, this is a picture of a kind of renewed Zion, but we're hardly introduced to these things for the first time right there. These ideas go back to the book of Exodus, and so it implies this sort of continuity throughout the scriptures, that what God is doing in the book of Exodus is not different than what he's doing in the Zion tradition. That this is, the way I teach this in my classes is that this is kind of like a snowball. Now, I haven't seen snow in a long time. I came up from Florida, and my daughter Maggie actually asked me to put snowballs in a plastic bag to bring home. That's probably not going to work out too well. But at least in the cartoons. You get this, someone pushing this little snowball down a hill, and then it continues to build and grow and grow and grow. And that is like what you get with the Exodus from Egypt toward the mountain of God. To the point that when we get this vision of a new Jerusalem, John takes that vision and he assumes that when he's presenting that vision, that you are aware of the book of Ezekiel, the book of Isaiah, and a whole host of other Old Testament passages. That whole vision of a new Jerusalem is kicked off by him saying that he was taken to a very high mountain, which is deliberately calling us back to Ezekiel's temple when he envisions this new temple. He too describes being taken to a high mountain. The vision of the city itself, John describes it as being gold. We tend to think of that as being, about the opulence of the city, but in kind of a temple idea, it reflects its holiness, because holiness was associated with the Holy of Holies. And then finally, because I'm over my time, I'll just mention that John is keen to tell us that the city is cube-shaped, which is the only other cube in all the Bible is the Holy of Holies. And when he looks in it, he sees no temple in the city because the dwelling of God is there. There's this sense in which there's no need for a temple. The entirety of the city now takes that place. So I hope by pulling on those three threads of the Israelites being brought out to covenant, being brought out toward holiness, and being brought out toward the mountain of God, this will be helpful to you in your study of Exodus throughout the scriptures. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Young. And let me return this precious manuscript to you.
Oh, yes.
So Dr. Young provided the main course. I'm just a bit of dessert, so I'll take a correspondingly shorter time, just giving you one example of the importance of Exodus for the New Testament, moving backwards. While Dr. Young went from Exodus to Revelation, I'm going to start in the Gospels and move back towards the Exodus and maybe even beyond. So provide one salient example of what is arguably the single most important Old Testament background to the New that there is. And that's why I was delighted to take the invitation to share here today, because I can't stress enough how important the Exodus is, which does mean for many of you, if you've had me in virtually any class I teach, somehow or other, we get the Exodus in there, and it's not forcing in there, it's just showing you that this thread is really what ties the text together. So I'll give you one quick example, and then a theological reflection on why that's important, and then a pastoral reflection on why this is important. Now I'm going to try to use my computer here, and that would be remarkable. Wow, it did work. A very familiar story of Jesus' baptism, right? And so Jesus is baptized, as you well know. He went up out of the water. This is Matthew's version. Saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, with whom I love, with him I am well pleased." And then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. So here at the very beginning, the inauguration of Jesus' public ministry, we have this seminal event of the baptism, and it is suffused with the imagery of the Exodus. Okay? So first we have this descent into the waters, and that can evoke both the passing through the Sea of Reeds and also the later transgression, moving past the Jordan into the Promised Land. But what's most critical, and what so many treatments of this important passage miss, is that the fact that this is followed by the journey into the wilderness is the entire point, in many ways, of the baptism. Because Jesus goes into the wilderness, the desert, and he's tested there for 40 units of time. Now, it's 40 days, but I say 40 units because how long, more or less, is Israel tested in the wilderness? 40 years. And just in case that Matthew wasn't able to get it through our thick skulls that he's talking about a renewed exodus, Jesus quotes from the Bible 3 times, and everyone knows that, and people say that shows that when you're tested and tempted, you need to respond with Scripture, which absolutely, I totally believe that. But is it a coincidence? You already answered no, the answer is no. Is it a coincidence that the place in the Bible he goes to is Deuteronomy 6-8, which is, every one of these quotes is from there, which is precisely where God talks about the fact that he brought Israel into the wilderness to test them, to see if they'll be loyal to him. Let me give you another rhetorical question. How'd they do with that? Abysmally. Jesus will succeed in the testing in the wilderness after his passing through the waters where the nation previously had failed. And so it is unquestionable. This is not some scholarly fancy or an imaginative reconstruction. This is what the passage is meant to do, is to tell you that Jesus, himself a Jew, is taking on the destiny of the nation into his own person and bringing people forward. Now, you may say, well, I thought, though, the going in the water and the Spirit of God descending, that sounds kind of like Noah more. Indeed, it does. And others, you might say, well, wait a second. When I think of the Spirit and the water, I think of Genesis 1. And you're also correct. Why is that? Because the Exodus and the flood are embedded. If I had 3 hands, it would work better, but I've only got the 2, embedded in the creation story. And Dr. Young has alluded to this briefly towards the beginning of his paper, but just think to the seminal event of the Exodus itself, that the Spirit from the Lord, a wind from the Lord, the Ruach, blows across the waters of the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, and dry land, Yabashah, appears, and that means life for the Israelites. It doesn't take a genius to see that that is precisely the template afforded in the primal story of Genesis. The flood narrative is, by contrast, a kind of decreation narrative where the waters which had been separated initially now collapse back in chaos because, as even a Sunday school child knows, the rains came down and the floods came up. This is cosmic decreation, which is then followed happily by a recreation where the waters recede after a dove hovers over the gloomy scene. The waters recede, the dry land appears, and just in case you didn't get that, it says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, etc. And so there is an embedding of God's salvation work in his creation work. And this is of immense significance theologically, and then I'm going to show how the Exodus is of immense importance pastorally. Theologically, this means that God's work in new creation, God's work in salvation, is not detached from, but is instead rooted in the narratives of divine action in the Old Testament. This is so crucial because an adulterated, dare I say, bastardized version of the biblical eschaton drives a lot of Western culture, such that we are continually meant to make progress, but that progress is always defined over and against the past, what Louis Dupré calls the self as pure project, that you're just meant to reinvent yourself, and at the societal level, it's perpetual promise of revolution, and this time we'll get it right. But the key to both self-development and social development is a cutting off of the past. And the Bible, while it does offer a promise of magnificent newness, has that in such a way that it's embedded in what's gone before and is an organic development out of that, such that the same God who has created the world is the one who is redeeming it or recreating it. And so that's of immense theological and I dare say social scientific importance. Secondly, why is the Exodus and its pervasive presence in Scripture so critical for pastoral ministry? It's because the fact that the New Testament repeatedly, regularly, consistently maps the Christian experience onto the Exodus is crucial because it affirms the narrative shape of Christian existence. This is crucial because so often we're presented with Christianity as if it were simply a philosophical proposition that you, as an isolated individual in the grand Western delusion, you are in some unsatisfactory relationship with this eternal God, but over here at some point provision has been made for you, and if you just click on the right button, that will be downloaded into your spiritual bank account, and then you won't have to go to hell, but you can go to heaven. Which I wouldn't quite put it that way, but I certainly believe in the atoning death of Jesus. I believe in justification by faith through grace. I believe in all of that. What I don't believe, though, is that this is the optimal way of framing the gospel such that an ordinary believer is often left with the sense that, well, okay, so I'm not going to hell, which is great, and now it's just kind of waiting around until I do, in fact, get to heaven. And I don't want to do anything because I heard that could tempt me to works righteousness, and I don't want to do that. So it's just this. And when I have a problem, the key thing is to believe the correct way. So I got to psych myself into a mindset where even though my life seems like a mess and I think I ought to change things, really, in real life, somehow everything's okay because Jesus, I guess. Right? And this static view of the Christian life, let alone when I ask you to actually do something, when God says, do this, and it's really important. Well, why? It's already been taken care of. When we recognize that the Exodus is the paradigm for Christian existence, we have both confidence, but also a reason to live. Because we do look backwards to a definitive event, the death of Christ on my behalf. We have been liberated from sin and death. That is in the past. But I am not yet in the promised land. I am on a journey of faith just as the Israelites were. I got a better covenant. I get more confidence that God will see me through, but I still need to engage in that enterprise. I still need to walk that journey through the wilderness of the world. In the great mall map of the cosmos, you used to go to the mall and there'd be a mall like, where am I? Oh, there's Spencer's Gift there and there's Macy's there, and you are here. Consistently in the New Testament, the mall map, you are here in the wilderness. You are tested, you are tried, and you need to exercise faith as you walk towards the promised land. And so there is a healthy sense of growth and development and dynamism and a movement forward, not simply a static, eternal, abstracted other self of you divorced from your everyday activities. And so your reading of the New Testament and frankly your ability to have a healthy spiritual existence in many ways, is dependent upon a recognition of this dynamic narrative Exodus pattern as the model for Christian existence. So, with that, I think we've got the appropriate amount of time for questions.
We do have a little bit of time. I think there are 2 microphones circulating. Would anyone like to ask a question? Yes, Kate.
Thank you. My question is for you, Dr. Young, and it's about kind of the pastoral implications also of what you shared. I was really struck at the beginning how you talked about we tend to interpret just the first half of the book of Exodus or just the second half, and the need to recognize the people were set free from something, but also set free for something. And I'm curious, would you say that that has implications for how we view God's paradigmatic act of salvation? Maybe we tend to either focus on like the personal holiness piece or the social transformation piece, and maybe the Exodus could help bring those together. I'm curious your take on that.
No, exactly. I think embedded in your question is, that's exactly why I wanted to focus on that to some degree, that the Exodus, when the New Testament authors refer back to the Exodus, they tend to keep both of those things together, being called out of darkness and into light. And, also the passage I quoted from Colossians about being transferred. It's not just that you're transferred from one kingdom, you're transferred into God's kingdom. And so I think for me, what's really been just helpful for me on a kind of, people might be surprised to hear me say this because, Bible, in Bible reading plans, people tend to get to the tabernacle and then that's where the Bible reading plans tend to stop. But it has been really helpful for me on a pastoral level to study about the temple, in kind of my years of theological education, reading G.K. Beale's The Temple of God and the Church's Mission and a host of other kind of works. One of the pastoral ideas associated with that is the idea that even now, as Christians, we are to live our lives oriented toward God's holy mountain. And that's not just something that's left in the past, right? And sure, we talk about the New Testament Christ talking about, not worshiping on this mountain or that mountain. But this idea of living our lives in association with God's holy mountain, I think has incredible implications for us as Christians in a way that talks about, that gives us an idea that holiness is not just about simply like morality and, doing this, obviously, we would say that, all those things are part of it. But there's this sense in which, as Christians, we are called to, we are being pulled by that hope of the mountain of God. And that one day we will, that hope of being planted on the mountain of God forever will be our destiny. And so anyway, all of that to say, I think we lose something. We lose so much if you sever the Exodus from that hope of what the Israelites are called out toward. And so anyway, yeah, I could go on about that, but thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you both. I wrote this down so that way I can say it succinctly. So if the tabernacle is meant to be a copy of the heavenly throne room temple, according to the pattern which Moses saw, thinking of like Stephen's speech, he brings that up too. Is it possible that the description of the priest and his garments is also meant to be taken as a pattern which Moses saw, creating a sense and longing for the true heavenly priest? So, what are the implications?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I didn't have much time to focus on the symbolism of the high priest, but I would certainly say that all of that kind of comes to us as a sort of composite picture of the high priest, and the symbolism of the high priest is very much connected to that picture. And so there's this sense in which, the high priest carries the stones on his chest, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel. And it's like, well, why not just put them in the temple? Like, keep them in the temple, keep them safe. But there's something about the idea that they are to be on Aaron's chest. And that Aaron is there's something about Aaron bringing those stones before Yahweh and representing the Israelites in that way, and in that picture of doing that, is crucial to the symbolism. And so the book of Hebrews makes clear that the priesthood the priesthood of Christ, Christ is our great high priest. He draws a distinction between Aaron, who had to enter in, repeatedly, this kind of coming and going in order to meet with Yahweh. You think of the Tamid rituals, these daily rituals of ongoing morning and evening rituals. And when you read that material in the tabernacle, there's this emphasis on the high priest, that there's this sense in which these rituals enable the high priest to meet with Yahweh. Like that's their ultimate kind of goal and purpose. And so the book of Hebrews makes clear that when Christ ascended into heaven, that he doesn't return after that point. He remains there. There's no need for this ongoing, back and forth, that Christ's ministry is better in that way than Aaron's. And so that's just scratching the surface of some of that symbolism. But anyway, I'll leave it there. So.
Time for maybe one more.
Dr. McDonough, you were talking about how you were trying to make the connection between the New Testament wilderness that Christians are in the Old Testament, like wilderness, Exodus period. And I was wondering if you could speak to just a couple of those distinctions in general, and what role the Spirit plays now in the exiles post-Pentecost, and whether that makes their exile look different, harder, easier, or something else.
Yeah, ever so briefly, probably the best example where the Exodus is overtly cited in a very serious context is 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and I guess since we've, no, just one of them, I don't want the second one. 1 Corinthians 10, Paul's confronting the Corinthian believers with their practice of going into idol temples and eating idol food, and they think it's just fine because they know they're wicked smart, so, there's no real idol, so as long as I basically cross my fingers, I'll be fine, right? Paul's like, yeah, not actually, not fine. And so he rehearses the Exodus story. Our ancestors were under the cloud, passed through the sea, baptized into Moses, ate the same spiritual food, drank the same spiritual drink. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them, and their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to us to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Don't be idolaters, don't commit sexual immorality, don't test Christ. So here Paul lays into the continuity between the old Exodus and the new Exodus, and indeed lays into it precisely at the point of potential for judgment for gross covenant-breaking idolatry, gross sexual immorality, right? A high-handed disobedience under the assumption that, well, because we were liberated, because something happened in the past, therefore I'm fine now. And however you're going to square that circle with Reformed or Arminian theology, the critical thing is, to note Paul's pastoral counsel is, you can't commit these kind of gross covenantal violations and expect to get away with it. Now, elsewhere, Paul will indeed say we're under a better covenant. We do indeed have the Spirit to help us in our weakness. We have Jesus, who has given us a definitive break with sin and death. All that is absolutely true, and yet we can't ignore the firm command of Paul to abstain from these, again, one more time, gross covenantal violations, and there is a strong threat attached to that. If you think you're standing firm, not just an ordinary believer, but someone who is betraying Christ, someone who's betraying their marriage vows, and saying, it's okay, no, be careful that you don't fall. Fall being an image, obviously, of gross violation and all that. So, the new covenant does give us these greater assurances. It does give us a greater empowerment, but it is not devoid of moral commitments or the need to exercise persevering faith, because as Jesus our Lord said, the one who endures to the end will be saved. Not in their own strength, not on the hamster wheel of achievement, not buying off God if they can accrue sufficient spiritual funds, but maintaining covenantal faithfulness. No idolatry, not breaking these serious moral sorts of things. So I'm just reading 1 Corinthians 10 basically and saying, don't theologize your way out of this. Make sure this is part of your perspective in addition to the more positive things. But again, we're talking gross violations. You missed the Wednesday prayer meeting because there was a foot of snow in your driveway. You're not going to hell because of that, right? Because you get people who, we're talking people, the Corinthians, who are just out of control. And Paul's still admonishing them and seeing hope for them, still positive, but he's given them some pretty strong medicine from the Exodus.